Croco.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me for another edition of Mental Maintenance. I have not done this show in a very long time, but I thank you guys so much for just being able to join me. This is probably one of my favorite series to actually do on Croco's Corner. It just gives me an opportunity to just think on a more mental level with you guys. You can look at this as just a mental maintenance for myself that I'm also just extending to possibly be mental maintenance for you guys as well. So I do just want to, thank anyone who's again ever come on to the mental maintenance side of our podcast. It's usually a very lighthearted show, podcast with content being centered around comics and anime and just things that are more of entertainment, whereas this is a little bit more serious, but it's something that I do try to be as lighthearted as possible with you guys. So again, anybody who has seen a previous episode of Mental Maintenance, or this is your first time, thank you for stopping by today. Well, before I actually begin, I do want to just also go back really quickly and say Croco's Corner, it again does have other content that we offer on this podcast, and that content again is comics, anime, and as such you can check out just the various anime and comic book material that I post here on Croco's Corner. Additionally, we also have a lot of material that we post over on Squad Nero podcast as well, so you can find that on YouTube, and also just kind of search for it in Twitch, T Smooth or Smooth Entertainment on Twitch, for anybody that's ever just been interested in larger discussions in regards to the more nerdy entertainment that is popular in today's world. Again, no, just hope you guys can forgive me for my little shameless plug right there. But we'll get back to what's at hand here, which is mental maintenance. Mental maintenance, we are going to be covering in this edition the topic of lust, which is a really maybe more unique topic to discuss, but that is what I really wanted to kind of just tackle. I had it here in my notes for a while now to discuss it, and I had held off from doing it. I didn't really think I was maybe the best person to even have a conversation about this, but then I thought about it. I'm like, it's something that everybody has ups and downs with to a certain extent. And the ones who don't, I'll kind of have a discussion about them here in a little bit in more detail a little bit later. But it's something that we've all either seen or encountered in some way, shape, or form if we have not experienced it ourselves. So that's why I figured I would just take this time to just have a discussion about it. I know that it's me talking to you without you being able to be heard on my end, and if you are conversing at all throughout this video, then it is you conversing without me being able to hear you on that end. But regardless, hopefully we can just create some solid dialogue in this episode and make a quality show that can give us some more thoughts and some more insight on exactly what is lust, how lust affects us, and on an intellectual and obviously further than that, mentally intellectual perspective, exactly what ways and should we be looking at it just in our lives, and how it affects and impacts us. So again, thank you guys so much for joining. Um, the way that I kind of set this show up was I wanted to articulate these thoughts from various questions that I essentially set up for myself, to be honest with you. Again, it was a very interesting topic to select for me. So I was like, well, what was the way that I can digest not only what I'm trying to say and what I've learned and what I am trying to say, but also what was the best approach for me to take with the largest level of humility in regards to this topic. So for me, what I finally came to the conclusion of in regards to what would be best would just be for me to ask a series of questions and just give breakdowns based off what I've either been able to learn, or breakdowns just in regards to what I think are good questions to ask. So the first question that I have here is um, it's kind of out of order, so I do apologize for that, but it's just more or less how it came to my head, and I want to break that down with you as it came to me. But lust, the first question is it immoral? So from a religious perspective, generally it is looked at as a sin. In Christianity and Islam, lust is associated with disorderly sexual proclivities. Ooh, big word for me to pronounce there. Sorry. But yeah, that the Christian and Islamic faiths, they view lust from the perspective of like adultery and simply put desires in relationship to sexual behavior and whatever would kind of fall under that realm. In Buddhism, lust is viewed as a contributor to suffering. I mean, suffering is one of those things where if you're Buddhist, suffering is what separates you from achieving nirvana, as nirvana is seen as a liberation from suffering. So, lustful ways kind of prevent the Buddhists from being able to achieve their ultimate, what they view as their ultimate goal, the path that they take for that goal. Generally, for religions, lust is viewed as a step beyond sexual desires, as these desires exist in a marriage. That's typically championed. That's something that is respected, is things that we don't, in our society, we don't often talk down about. If you have these things with your partner who you are committed to and who you are married to, who you have a larger bond with, one that you may even define as being spiritual, then the lustiness that forms in those situations are viewed as being more appropriate, moral. Even moral is a big word that I'll use throughout this, but moral. uh Lust from a religious perspective is said when desire takes root outside of the religious moral boundaries. So whether you're Christian, whether you're Islamic, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Buddhist, whatever the case may be, it's when we it's the ideas of desires taking a root outside of, in a way, you. So the moral boundary that is typically crossed, again, to put simply, it's when the desire it governs you versus you actually being able to govern the desire. And in our religious texts, these things are used. The surrounding material is what's used to dictate and guide us as to whether that behavior, that desire, that passion is something that dictates us, or whether it's something that we actually keep in check and that we govern over ourselves. From a philosophical perspective, lust is viewed in multiple ways. In a lot of ways, they are very similar to the moral integrity that the religious faiths will ask of you. In other ways, it's a little bit more nuanced, and I'll kind of go into that in a second. But you'll hear me say, I'll probably say this again on a mental maintenance episode, maybe not this one, but one in the future. You'll hear me mention that I do think that a lot of the moral basis that we have in society comes from the same moral basis that we've seen in areas that have dictated society in the past, such as religion, or even now, but such as religion. A lot of our foundations are grounded upon a lot of commonalities in regards to what we view as being moral and immoral. It's when we apply a more psychological and a more sociological mind frame to these things that we start to have more nuance, to say the least. In this example with lust is definitely the same thing. So just kind of going back here again, the philosophical perspectives. If you're looking at it from the classic Stoicism view, lust is viewed as a passion, and unbridled passion should be kept in check. It's that simple. Anybody who would characterize themselves as being Stoic, you probably picture the ideas of things that can be less moral in this way. It's very grounded, black and white. It's as simple as that. It's a passion, and if that passion is left unchecked, then that's a problem. That's the simple way that the classical stoicism way kind of looks at it. The next way is natural law theory. Natural law theory says that lust will fall under the umbrella of sexual faculties. A lot more nuanced, I feel like, as we get in these other two. Furthermore, sexual faculties should be used for natural purposes, which is typically viewed as for marriage or procreation. So, um, again, the natural law theory kind of follows the religious ideologies and kind of grounding these things in specific areas of our lives where we can essentially check them, such as in marriage or in procreation. If we choose to use those two things responsibly as well. The third way here is going to be in secular humanism, which the faculties of lust are more called to question as opposed to the desires itself. If lust leads to a harmful impact on individuals or society, it can be morally problematic. I don't hate this definition either. I think, the reality of human beings in society is that we kind of tiptoe across a bunch of these examples, right? Like, we have elements where the religious foundation may be the closest foundation that we have to us, but then there's others who maybe didn't necessarily have a religious upbringing, and for those individuals, just kind of the societal groundworks that we've put in place for morality kind of get us to these points. So, and these are things that even if you are on one side or the other, you still kind of cross the threshold of the other, because a lot of the principles end up lining up with each other, whether it was by intent or whether it was with intent or it was completely accidental. It's just kind of how it goes. So I think if I were to speak for myself personally, I think that these perspectives on lust are essentially the ways that I have come to understand and know how lust necessarily presents itself. I do believe that there is more to lust, and I'll have a larger discussion on this as this podcast goes forward. But I do believe that there is a little bit more to that, and I'll kind of go into how I personally feel. But the next thing that I had is I said to myself as I was writing this stuff down, and again, this was a while ago, maybe I should have reorganized it, but the reality is I didn't, and I'm kind of getting my mind frame back in regards to what exactly I was thinking when I had set these questions up. But when I asked the question of the morality or the immoral or moral standing of lust, after that I said, well, you know what, Niall, you got to back up a little bit. Got to back up, Croco. Before that, what even is lust? How can lust be defined? So I was able to just kind of look up some different scholarly opinions on lust and what exactly they would define lust as. Some people, again, more with this topic, there are instances where it's more loose, and there's more nuance to it than necessarily what even the definition will share. But I do think that these things are good insight, and these are from people who are respected, not just in their field, but for being experts in regards to things as they apply to society, have been regarded to as such, at least. The first definition that I have comes from Helen Fisher, who's worked extensively within neurobiology as it relates to love and attraction. Helen describes lust as one of the three primary brain systems for mating. Lust is the craving for sexual gratification associated primarily with the hormones that drive individuals to seek sexual union with almost any appropriate partner. I don't know if I agree with Helen's definition here. You can tell that Helen, with her background, took a more scientific approach to it, whereas I feel like there is a level even in the scientific approach, if we do have understanding of that we need to understand on a social and philosophical level, that I just don't feel like Helen necessarily incorporated completely here. But I don't necessarily disagree with the points that she made either, and I think that is very advantageous for us to keep notes on what exactly the scientific viewpoint of it looks like. The next definition that I have comes from St. Augustine. Now, real just kind of quick back, I went to private schools, more specifically Catholic school, my entire life. So I know that St. Augustine, aside from the religious elements to St. Augustine was very, very scholarly and intellectual in areas that affected more, you could even say more than just religion, even though obviously with St. Augustine having a religious background, things were oftentimes rooted behind the faith that Augustine had. But uh, despite that, I do still like a lot of the intellectual ideas and concepts and philosophies that have come from St. Augustine, even if looked at from outside of a religious standpoint. So I please ask that anybody listening to this can also have an open mind in regards to St. Augustine in this specific piece. But St. Augustine says he philosophized. That is a hard word to say. I'm just going to replace that word so I don't take too much time trying to pronounce it here on this recording. But St. Augustine, anyways, he states, lust is being disordered desire or appetite that pulls reason and will away from their proper aims. I really like this definition. Yeah, and I was, in a way, when I was kind of researching into these things further, I'll be completely honest with you, I knew that I can get the kind of insight that I would want from somebody like St. Augustine, but that comes from my history with knowing St. Augustine. But to be honest with you, even at that, for this to come from a religious person was really insightful for me, at least personally, because out of every definition, it's the one that it feels like has the least amount of rules, but also maybe the most amount of clarity, if that makes sense. I'll kind of go more into why exactly I like St. Augustine or St. Augustine, however you pronounce it. I'm sorry for anybody that's been mad at me for the last 5 minutes for pronouncing his name wrong. But I will go into more detail exactly what I personally like about this philosophy here. The next up is the Catholic Church. So this is a religious definition. Be it whether this is the religion that you belong to or not. I just wanted to include a religious definition in here. But the Catholic Church defines lust as inordinate desire for an inordinate amount, or an inordinate enjoyment of sexual pleasure. With this version, this definition, outside of both Helen Fisher's definition and also St. Augustine's definition. St. Augustine's definition, has it's a lot more general, a lot more vague in regards to exactly what it connects lust to, whereas Helen and the Catholic Church in these scenarios, so both science and religion, believe it or not, they have something in agreement here. They both look at this as being predicated primarily around sexuality, whereas St. Augustine, as we've seen, it isn't really regarded that way. There's more of a philosophical approach to it, and one that's more general and that can more or less apply to anyone. After that, I have, and I apologize for mispronouncing names. Anybody who has ever listened to a podcast of mine knows that I am very bad at pronouncing names. I'm trying to work on it. I do my little voice translators on Google and whatnot, but it is not enough. I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to get there. But Michel Foucault is another respected scholar and scholarly opinion. In the book, The History of Sexuality, Michel analyzes that lust is not a static natural essence, but a historically and culturally produced category that has been subject to various forms of power, knowledge, and confession. He views lust as less an inherent human drive and more as a concept defined and disciplined by societal norms and power structures, particularly religious ones. I do think that there is a little bit of angst in regards to religion and that specific definition for lust, or not necessarily a definition, but just viewpoint for lust. Me personally, though, I will be honest with you. I will probably take Michel and Augustine's viewpoints in this scenario and say that I think those are the ones that are the most reflective of exactly how lust exists in our society. My biggest thing is, to Augustine's point, I don't think that lust simply exists in sexual desires. And even to Michelle's point, I don't think that it's just grounded in sexual desires. I do think people can lust over money. I do believe people can lust over power. I do believe that people can lust over things that are away from sexual activity and sexual activeness. I like the way that the Catholic Church worded it, and as well Augustine worded it when they referred to lust as disorderly passion. I think that that is probably where I land personally, and taking those different viewpoints into play and applying them to what I personally feel comfortable believing. I would line up with that specific phrasing of it, is the idea of it being disordered passions or emotions. Lust is a representation of disordered passions and emotions. And these things in our lives, in my life, I've seen it not just with myself, but with various and numerous amounts of people. This ultimately leads to immoral decisions. So, saying that one more time, so I can say it really clear. The definition for lust that I've come to accept and settle on is the idea that lust is a disordered passion or emotion that leads to immoral decisions. I think that that is fair to assess lust as being. You can add more to that. You can go the route of the more scientific or the more religious aspect and adding sexual activity to that as being a precursor needed for lust. I personally am not going to do that because I do, again, believe that it is larger than the activities that we do from a sexual nature. The next point that I have here, or question I should say, is what exactly can you lust over? So this kind of goes to my ending point, kind of adding on that more. And it is tricky because oftentimes the biggest way that we do look at these things is through sexuality. I mean, when you think of lust, you think of adultery and you think of just general cheating, or you think of unfaithfulness of some sort in a way between one person and another that culminates in them engaging passionately, physically passionate behavior with each other. That is the generally accepted view. But I do think if we go back to Michel Foucault's assessment, we have to remember that he said that he thinks that these things are dictated and shaped and molded by the societal forces that govern us. And that's where I kind of agree with him, because I think for whatever reason, our society has shaped us to be surrounded by sex. But I think that it would have been it's a lot more easier for us to appreciate if we look at it as being an attitude that can be attributed to many different things. I think that that can create more recognition for people to be able to see exactly where they maybe fall in the realm of lust and lustful behaviors. When you ground it to one specific thing, there's a bunch of people who could think they just aren't partaking in that, and then I'm doing good because I'm not partaking in it. You could kind of have that response to it. And I think that that's unfair to the human psychology. The human psychology, if they can connect more things as opposed to having everything sectioned and segmented off, it's easier for us to figure out how exactly we can do the right thing in more applications than less. And I think that is a big problem that we face when we look at something like lust. But if we were being completely honest, this exists in more than just with lust. This exists in a myriad of issues that we personally face that do happen to be with having a sexual relationship or sexual connection to it. So this, when we think about this, the abuses that people go through and different things like that, did they lust for those actions that they were doing? Did lust play any part in those actions? When we open it up to a broader conversation, I think that's where people can hone on and understanding exactly how disorderly lust is and how disorderly lustful behaviors can be. Again, it can extend past sex, but even if we just look at it from the context of sexual behaviors, how much bad comes from the taboo that we put around the conversations that we have around sexual relationships in any sort. that is something that I would love to see us be able to change. I think that that would be great if we had conversations in regards to these things at younger ages with people and got them to understand where they should maybe put the necessary checks in place. We will be doing a huge justice to society and probably can help with not just the lustful natures that we have and how those things impact people like our girlfriends, our boyfriends, our spouses, our families, our children, our maybe small community, depending on what exactly the action is. I think that we can actually start to see some changes, positive changes, that take us away from that specific, or as many instances of the immoral actions happening through sexual acts, if we were to actually just have the proper education around these things. And I think that lust is included in that. How do I think we personally can control ourselves and correct ourselves when it comes to lustful behaviors? I just think it goes back to self-therapy at this point. Many of us, sexual topics were a taboo for us, and it's okay that it's not okay that was the case for us, but we sometimes have to be able to accept the water under the bridge, and the idea that we didn't get the education maybe as thoroughly as we should have and maturely as we should have at a younger age is not something that we can combat now. But we can combat these things now by having the responsibility to give ourselves self-therapy in regards to these issues. If we can look at our impulses more as disorders within ourselves, we not only will be teaching ourselves to identify that we do have shortcomings, which provides us with a stronger sense of humility, but also we'll be able to check ourselves before an immoral action can take place as a result of our passion. So again, whether this is in direct relationship to lust or is used in a larger context, I do believe that when it comes to those disorderly passions that we do have or that we sometimes face, the best thing that we can do is figure out how we can give ourselves a self-check and hold ourselves accountable and find the humility and teach ourselves the humility to be able to do these things. The last question I have here, I'm going to try to make this one quick because I do want to wrap this video up relatively soon. We're getting towards that 30-minute point. Is what exactly is the difference between lust and passion? And I think that this is best kind of phrased when we look at the religious aspect of the relationship that we have with God. I myself am Christian, and I do just think that, there is a difference because you don't necessarily lust after God. When you commit yourself to God, it's more so a true passion that you have for God and God's will. And that even if you aren't a believer in God, I still feel like however you can apply that to yourself personally and the grander society that can provide some level of a check is great. In Romans 12:2, it states, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve that what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." And I think that this is just a great example of this. It's trying to get you away from the worldly passions that may be disorderly that you face and facing something that for religious and spiritual folks is stronger than them. You see this as well in the Old Testament when they discuss covets. You also see this in the Quran in examples such as the Surah al-Imra. There's discussions of shahwat in the Quran. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but these are the ideas of getting away from our desires. And we see how much discipline in the Muslim faith, we see a lot of that discipline replicated, and it is something that can be looked at depending on the person, but can be looked at as something that is very honorable in its way. That's pretty much it for me, guys, though. Just try to separate yourself from the disorderly passions and put yourself more in a place with order with yourself. Whether you do this from a spiritual and religious level or whether you do this from a personal and psychological level, whatever you feel the most comfortable with, but putting yourself in the middle of the disorderly passions and placing yourself around more true passions is the way to go and what we want to kind of work on here. I would love to revisit this topic. There's a lot of things that I would like to kind of revisit in the near future that I've talked on before. But right now, I just feel good kind of talking to you guys like this and just getting whatever pops up in my head out. So thank you guys again for watching. Please, again, make sure to like and subscribe. Again, we have more lighthearted, like comic book content, less educational, less psychological content with Croco's Corner and Squad Nero podcast. So just be on the lookout for that if that's something that you guys enjoy. Outside of that, thank you guys. And yeah, take care.